Yesterday, my 17-year-old niece left for Europe to go to college. And while she was packing, her mother, Amaryllis, my daughter-in-law, noticed that she had put a Bible in her suitcase. And Amaryllis was curious about it. And she asked her, and Zoe said to her, "I want to live like Charlie Kirk." And there are millions and millions of kids around the country who he inspired who now want to live with Charlie Kirk, and that's a great thing for our country. I met Charlie for the first time in July of 2001. I went on his podcast, and I think we approached each other with a lot of trepidation at that time, but by the end of the podcast, we were soulmates, we were spiritual brothers, and we were friends. And over the next couple of years, our friendship blossomed. He ended up being the primary architect of my unification with President Trump, which I did my endorsement at his rally, at the Turning Point rally in Scottsdale. And he was the one who put the sparklers on the stage when I shook it. He made a big show of it. But the overarching mission of Charlie Kirk was Jesus, but also free speech, and he saw them as intertwined. He thought conversation was the only way we were going to heal our country. We had to learn to talk to each other without vitriol, without poison, without anger. We had to be able to listen to ideas. We had to be able to say what we mean without being mean, and to talk to each other across this divide. It's the only way to end the polarization that's driven now by these algorithms and by all these other forces in our society. And that first conversation with him that I had, we talked a lot. We had a wide-ranging conversation. We talked mainly about the First Amendment. We talked about the fact that our founders put freedom of speech in the First Amendment because all the other rights are dependent on it. A government that can silence its opponents has license for any kind of atrocity. And we were specifically talking about what happened during the pandemic. Once the government figured out that we would put up with the censorship, they went after the entire Constitution. They immediately took away our right to assembly, the First Amendment right with social distancing regulations. They shut down the First Amendment right to worship by closing all of our churches for almost a year and keeping the liquor stores open as essential businesses. They went after our Fifth Amendment right to our property rights. They closed down 3.5 businesses with no due process, no just compensation. They went after our Seventh Amendment right to jury trials by making whole categories of businesses that we could no longer sue no matter what they did to us. They went after the Fourth Amendment right, the protection against unwarranted searches and seizures, with all these social distancing regulations that made us have to produce our medical records before we went to a public building or an airplane or enjoyed other constitutional rights. And Charlie, more than any figure in our country, led the resistance that has restored freedom of speech to this country. And he built this movement, which is going to make sure that that never, ever happens again. when my brother David died, I had a conversation with my mother, who had been through more than her share of loss and tragedy. And I asked her, does the hole that they leave in you when they die, does it ever get any smaller? And she said, no, it never gets any smaller. But our job is to build ourselves bigger around the hole. We do that. We do that by taking the best virtues and character traits of the person that we lost and using discipline and restraint and practice, integrating those character traits into our own character. And in doing that, we make ourselves larger and the whole gets proportionally smaller. And we also give that person a kind of immortality because they are now living on, the best parts of them are now living on in us. In one of my conversations, and Charlie was a target-rich environment for virtues. We can all think of something extraordinary he did: his love of family, his love of God, his love of freedom of speech, his reverence for this country, his belief that we are an exemplary nation. We are unique in history. We're the only nation with this kind of constitution. In Europe, they don't have free speech anymore. We have it here, and we are the beacon for humanity for the rest of the world. And all of those... all of those visions, his vision, his mission to preserve those things, his kindness in talking to people with whom he disagreed, are all things that we need to learn, and we need to integrate into our own lives. And as Tulsi said, we need to reach out with love to the people on the other side who are asleep and who are too frightened and too panicked and too controlled to understand what they are losing. And we need to protect those things until they wake up. And I had a conversation once with Charlie where we were talking about the danger that we both faced from challenging entrenched interests. And he asked me if I was scared to die. And I said to him, there's a lot worse things than dying. And one of those... and chief among those is losing our constitutional rights and having our children raised in slavery. And I said to him at that time, I said, sometimes our only consolation is that we can die with our boots on. We can die fighting for these things. Charlie gave his life so that the rest of us would not have to suffer those fates worse than death. Now it's our job, he's no longer there to lead us, to rush in and fill the breach and win this battle for our country, for God, and for our families. Thank you all very much.
Please welcome the Senior Advisor for the U.S. Agency for Global Media, Carrie Lake.